Kids, it's time to get cleaned up for the reunion. Let's get a move on.
Ugh, Dad, come on. Why?
What's a reunion, Dad?
It's a great party made up of relatives that unite to celebrate their common heritage and honor their ancestors.
Sisters?
No, Connor, not sisters, ancestors.
You know, your grandpa, your great-grandpa, your great-great-grandpa, stuff like that.
Songbirds? Tweety? Songbirds like Tweety? Cheep, 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 cheep.
No, Connor and Savannah. Sonbergs. All of you come here and sit down. I think we have enough time for a quick story about why we are songbirds. I mean, Sonbergs. It was 1835 in north-central Denmark, in a small township called Seville-Ringkøbing, that our ancestor Jens Christian Hansen was born. Jens' mother, Johan Jensen, was not married at the time, a common thing in Denmark, and Jens' natural father left soon thereafter, only to die a year later in his hometown. Jens had one stepsister named Dorte when he was 13, but she died at 1 year old. As far as we know, Jens was raised partly by his mother and stepfather, Jorgen Larsen. In 1850, when Jens was 15, Erastus Snow and other LDS missionaries arrived in Denmark for the first time. We don't know details of Jens' conversion, but we know his mother was baptized and he joined the LDS Church in October 1852 at 17 years old. We don't know much of Jens' youthful years, except that he entered the fields of battle at age 29 during the Denmark-Prussian War of 1864 of its population. In a letter years later, Jens alluded to the violence and horrors of war. Now don't you think you know the way they are massacring men in the European war, just massacring soldiers by the hundreds and thousands and millions against another without mercy, against the murder machines invented from the lowest hell for to make a quick end of it. And think of the poor served soldiers, young men when the flowers of mankind, for they always take the most perfect as long as there's any to be got. They are stirred up by the most inflammatory species to fight for their country, kings, families, and nationalities, and so they go and murder still worser than ever, just thinking it a fun to murder the more the better. I know a little what I am talking about, because I have been in such places myself upon the battlefield, and the merciful Lord in his kindness saved my life when the missiles of every kind was flying over our heads, bursting to many pieces, and others bursting when striking the ground besides gun bullets. But I am here unscathed, for which thanks and honor and praise be to our all-wise and merciful Heavenly Father. As you look at all of the pictures closely that we have of Jens, you will see this medal of 1864 proudly affixed on every coat. Note also the type of dress used in the war. When Jens was only 10 years old, not 100 miles away, Karen Hansen was born in Vejle, Viborg, June 30th, 1845. Our information on Karen's youth is non-existent except that she was born to Hans Jacobsen and Else Niels' daughter, and had 7 brothers and sisters. Someday we hope to meet the many descendants of Karen's brothers and sisters, and perhaps they have more information on Karen's young life. Jens and Karen's lives finally merged on August 21, 1866, when they were married at ages 30 and 21 respectively. That's just 1 year after the U.S. Civil War ended. Soon thereafter, they had their first 2 kids, Jens Jr. and Jacobine Mathia, known as Tia. Young Danish converts to Mormonism suffered great cruelty and persecution in Denmark in those years. We don't know details of the Hansens' suffering, but it surely existed. They had to be strong.
So it was that in 1871, Jens and Karen packed up their 2 small children and boarded a boat named the Minnesota in the port of Copenhagen and set out for America.
Jens and Karen soon arrived at Ellis Island, and like millions of other immigrants, were interviewed, inspected, and allowed into our great country. Their names can be found engraven upon the immigrant wall at Ellis Island even today.
From there, Jens and Karen lucked out. Just months before arriving in the United States, the Transcontinental Railroad was finished, and our small family of ancestors were able to ride the train in style all the way to Utah. It's amazing to think that
The Hansens' first month in Utah had to have been very difficult. They had arrived to a new country, surrounded by strangers, couldn't speak the language, had virtually no money or possessions, and finally, their daughter baby Tia succumbed to illness and died on July 31st, 1871. She was just 17 months old. Upon arriving in Salt Lake, the Hansens settled in Richfield, which at that time was wild Indian country. Just 4 years previous, Brigham Young had closed Richfield down and drawn its citizens out after numerous Indian attacks. But 4 years later, the Hansens and other Nordic immigrants were encouraged to try again. On one occasion, a group of malevolent Indians forced entry into their home while Karen and her little children were alone. Fearing for their life, Karen was forced to give the Indians all of their food, but they survived the ordeal. For the first 2 or 3 years, the Hansens lived in a humble home called a dugout. Dugouts were typically made by burrowing a wall into the side of a hill, then building out the front end of the shack and roofing the structure with limbs and mud.
Shortly thereafter, the Hansens were able to build their first true home out of logs. Though we're not so sure when, sometime during Jen's and Karen's first years in the United States, they added the last name Sonberg. Danish last names traditionally were very few and caused much confusion. Perhaps this was why. For some 21 years, the Sonbergs lived in Richfield, Utah, and while there, their next 7 children arrived. Their son Hans died of typhoid fever when he was 10 years old. Then, looking for a better homestead, they helped settle a new area which was eventually coined Spring Glen in central Utah. Ever the adventurers, the large Sonberg clan didn't stay long in Spring Glen. Advertisements bragging of cheap, rich farmland in Alberta, Canada began circulating, and Jens, now in his 60s, along with his wife, children, and grandkids, all took off. Life in Canada didn't last long, as the promised land was not so fertile and the cold winters were brutal. After just 2 or 3 years, Jens and Karen returned to Spring Glen, where they would finish out their life.
Jens and Karen lived to be 79 and 67 years, respectively. They brought 9 children and hundreds of progenitors to this world. They crossed the earth and sacrificed many comforts with hopes of a better life for themselves and their family.
We don't know many details about our great-grandmother Karen. She must have been a strong-willed, determined lady to have endured the adventures of her husband. She endured 2 children's deaths at young ages. Her faith in God must have been strong, as her youngest daughter Annie died, but was miraculously brought back to life through a priesthood blessing. She endured primitive living conditions, Indian attacks, and yet taught and raised a beautiful first generation of Americans and Canadians that form what today is a marvelous society of people.
Our great-grandfather Jens was an amazing man. He joined the LDS Church at a young age, endured persecutions, and was firm and faithful to his conviction all the days of his life. This strength and courage has paid off in so many ways, as we will look around the room at our reunion and see so many good people. One treasure we have from Jens are some family letters he wrote to his youngest daughter Annie, wherein we can appreciate Jens' soft heart, his compassion for his kids, and his yearning love for his wife Karen, who had recently passed away. To read those letters, one can truly see the marvelous spirit of Jens Christian Hansen. In one of the last recorded letters we have to his daughter Annie, he closes by saying, "Well, my very dear girl, how thankful I am to you for this very kind and sweet cheerful letter you sent me. Oh, I can't read it without crying by saying how much that some of my children really feel about their old lonely father, who has lost the best he had here upon this earth, to comfort me. Nothing can ever take your mother's place, nothing like her, for we knowed one another, we would help one another, we were just like one, and being so more and more for every year we lived. And now, my dear girl, I feel so thankful to you for your sweet sympathy you expresses for me, and for your kindness and interest in looking after my things up there." Well, kids, I hope to someday meet Jens Christian and Karen, and I hope you see why reunions are so important. If it weren't for them, I would never have been born.